We look forward to beginning this third plenary session of the 13th Shangri-La Dialogue. We move from the topic of advancing military-to-military cooperation to another important defense diplomatic task, which is not unrelated to the first, which is managing strategic tensions. And there's been a lot of talk already about the heightened tensions in the region, and the task of the three ministers we've assembled here is to give their perspective on how these tensions will be managed and risk mitigated so that military-to-military cooperation in the Asia-Pacific can continue principally as an exercise in soft power projection rather than anything else. We have three very distinguished gentlemen again to speak to us. The Minister of Defense of Indonesia, Minister of Defense of Australia, Minister of National Defense of Vietnam. The heads of government of all three of these countries have been previous opening keynote speakers at the Shangri-La Dialogue, and I'm delighted that they've continued their intense commitment to the Shangri-La Dialogue process that flowed in part from the strong statements each of their head of governments in the past have made at this event. I will ask each of the ministers to speak in the order in which they appear in the program, again for about 12 minutes each, and the format will be similar to in the second plenary, where I'll entertain half a dozen or more questions and crisp comments from the floor before returning to the panel for their reaction. So may I first invite, on the theme, managing strategic tensions, Pak Purnomo, the Minister of Defense of Indonesia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. I'm honored to be invited once again by the IISS to the Shangri-La Dialogues to share our views on important issues shaping peace and security in our region. May I also address my greetings to my esteemed colleagues and a good friend, Dr. Eng Han, the Defense Minister of Singapore, and through him to the Singapore government. I am also delighted to see many of my colleagues from around the world here today. This is my fifth time to have the privilege to contribute as a presenter. This session is about the managing strategic tension. Let me begin by making the point that this is an issue where we in this region have had some good experience and many lessons learned. Decades ago, Southeast Asia was a hotbed for strategic tensions. The Cold War divided the Southeast Asia, and we suffer wars, including proxy wars and conflicts. Many countries in the regions had low confidence in one another, and they did not feel that they were on the driver's seats of events in the regional affairs. But we changed that. We built our regionalisms brick by bricks, passionately. ASEAN 5 became 6, became 10, and has now become the ASEAN family of 10, and even we have now the ASEAN plus 8. One by one, the conflicts that burden the nations in the region were resolved or put under controls. For example, Indonesia managed to peacefully end long-standing conflicts in Aceh, and the Philippines resolved the conflicts in certain part of the country. The East Timor questions was permanently settled in 1999, a number of bilateral overlapping maritime borders were solved. The process usually took decades and sometimes even had to resort to an international tribunal. But at the end, they were resolved peacefully. I think people sometimes overlook that Southeast Asia has a good track record to resolve maritime boundaries. We appreciate Prime Minister Abe last night acknowledgements that Indonesia and the Philippines is a good model for territorial dispute resolution without the use of violence. We also did the same approach between Indonesia and Vietnam in resolving the economic zones in peaceful ways in the past, although it took more than a decade to renegotiate that. Thus, one of the most important geopolitical developments in Asia was the Southeast Asia dealt with the strategic tension with reasonable success. We transform relation with one another. We transform relation with the major powers and turn Southeast Asia into a coherent region marked by peace and cooperation. The Southeast Asian experience informed us that in order to manage strategic tensions, you need to change the strategic mindsets. There is a sea of difference between seeing someone as a dangerous rival and seeing someone as a potential partner. And the difference can be clearly seen in the policy options that we chose and how we approach potential disputes and how we respond to the new initiatives, either with a guarded suspicion or with open-mindedness. Indonesia has always been a nation devoted to an independent and active foreign policy. But we also had to evolve our strategic mindset over and over again and replan it into our collective national consciousness and worldview. It took some hard thinking, an active revaluation of national interests, an emerging landscape, and it took a leadership. We had experienced turbulent relations with other countries. However, in each of these changing relationships, we turned the corner by way of courage, creativity, and pragmatism. And by changing our relation, we are also changing the future. All of us in this forum are now in the midst of a historical challenge to redefine peace and security for the 21st century. Learning from the 20th century, we must create conditions where big war and nuclear annihilation is a total impossibility. And we must ensure that the ongoing power shift, both at the global and regional levels, will not lead to rising tension, but to a new geopolitics of cooperation. There are still roadblocks that stand in our way: geostrategic privilege, mutual suspicions, lingering historical animosities, long-standing territorial and jurisdictions dispute. On top of that, the crisis in Ukraine is not only producing new security concerns, it is also provoking fresh questions about the prospect of new Cold War between Russia and the West. The prolonged war in Syria, with a new wave of external jihadists taking part in it, in causing alarm elsewhere. Renewed tension in the South China Sea are also causing jitters among some of us in the regions. And emotional tensions remain in the complex disputes in Northeast Asia. But there are also new opportunities that we can seize the evolve of more positive security environments for all of us. We saw how the countries and militaries work together to find the missing Malaysian airplanes, to help typhoon victims in Philippines, to save the tsunami survivors in Aceh, Indonesia, and many others. And we can also count on the fact that there is a process of realignment of interests that has produced many more converging points for the national interests of different countries. The fact that China and ASEAN are in the process of formulating the much anticipated practical code of conduct for the South China Sea is actually an important departure and something that would be unthinkable decades ago. We are now, therefore, in a good place to harness stronger peace for our region. A good place to start will be to reaffirm our mutual commitment to common norms that bind us together. Here, the most important, in my view, is the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, TAC, to which many of the countries taking part here are signatories and have acceded to. This treaty is not just a convenient pro forma document. It contains principles and norms that remain and, in fact, is an even more relevant to our evolving security situation today. And more recently, all the countries in East Asia Summit in 2011 adopted the Bali Principles on mutually beneficial cooperation, which contain clear principle and norm on how to manage regional affairs. Both of the Treaty and Amity and Cooperation and the Bali Principles are active living documents. If all the signatories think and act consistent with the spirit of the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation and the Bali Principles, I have no doubt that we will be rewarded with a much more stable and predictable order in our region. That is why Indonesia and the ASEAN should always hold ourselves as well as our partners accountable to these norms which will amplify trust building. This strategic trust come handy in view of that fact. Many countries, including Indonesia, are embarking an ambitious military modernization program. In Indonesia, our defense budget has grown significantly, and we intend to continue to modernize our armed forces to achieve the necessary capabilities of essential forces by the year 2020s. Indonesia's military modernization is not predicted on our particular state enemy. Indeed, we have proclaimed a condition of zero state enemy and a million friends. Our modernization is mainly a program to make our armed forces more professional and more capable to deal with a host of non-traditional security threats. Besides, armed forces is to protect our country, the unity of our country. Military modernization is not an arms race, but it does need a positive regional security framework marked by the confidence-building measure, trust, and transparency. We in Indonesia are quite mindful that our quest of more security for ourselves does not need to lead to more insecurity for others. It is always better for strategic intentions to be rightly understood, not wrongly perceived by others. Transparency and clarity will lessen misunderstanding and reduce mistrust. That is why the ASEAN Regional Forum, the ADMM, ASEAN Defense, the Ministers Meeting, the ADMM Plus, ASEAN Defense Minister Meeting Plus 8 countries, the ASEAN Annual Meeting of Intelligence Chief and Armed Forces Chief, the Joint Military Exercise, and other measures have been enormously helpful in improving understanding and cooperation among the defense establishment in our region, in ASEAN. I'm convinced that the defense diplomacy will play a more important role in future regional security environment. We can also better manage strategic tension by adjusting ourselves to a new dynamic equilibrium. The geostrategic environment remains very fluid. It is a safe bet that the United States will remain a military superpower for quite some times and will be an important factor for security and progress globally and regionally. China's power across the board will also be certain grow, and she will a key player shaping the new global order. ASEAN will soon evolve into a community and hopefully also a solid political security community by next year. Japan, India, South Korea, and many others will also want to exercise their rightful roles in accordance with their evolving situations. There is nothing inherently alarming that all of this, and it is not inevitable that all this lead to conflict. The region is big enough for the US, China, ASEAN, and all of the emerging powers. And in time, we'll need to recalibrate our regional security architecture, better accommodate this evolving dynamic equilibrium. In the final analysis, stable and peaceful relations among the major powers are critical for us. In particular, all of us want to see strong, stable, and thriving US-China relations. Indeed, we want China and the US to compete in our region. We want Japan and China to compete in our region. We want all extra-regional powers to compete in our region. But we want them to compete for peace and prosperity. We want them to compete for more trade, for more investment, for more connectivity. We want them to compete for more students, for more technology, for more tourists. We want them to compete for more soft power, for more cooperation and more peace. When they compete for peace, when they compete for progress, there is no winner or loser. Indeed, nobody loses and everybody's winner. And that is the formula for 21st century in security. I thank you.
Pak Purnomo, thank you very much for those remarks, and in particular for reminding us at the beginning the way in which events elsewhere can also affect the security environment in the Asia-Pacific. Could I now invite the Minister for Defence of Australia, Senator David Johnston, to address us. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John, and thank you for the contribution you make to strategic studies, a very important space from Australia's perspective. Can I also thank Prime Minister Lee, but particularly Defence Minister Phung, for this most magnificent weekend. Minister, can I thank you for the way Singapore rolls out the red carpet to all of us. It is a very, very significant meeting. I thank you for the facilitation, the hospitality and the friendship that you've provided to all of my team from Australia. You can rest assured we will always be back at every opportunity to Shangri-La. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the opportunity to make a contribution to this plenary session on managing strategic tensions. This is a subject of vital importance to Australia. As most of you know, Australia is a trading nation whose economic growth and prosperity is very heavily reliant on the free flow of goods and services into the international trading system. Over the decades since World War II, that trading system, particularly in the Asia-Pacific, has benefited from growing economic and social interdependency among our economies and our nations. And this has been underpinned by the unhindered movement of trade through the major trade routes, the so-called sea lines of communication. It is clearly in our collective best interest to ensure the continuation of a stable trading system. That means we should resolve peacefully and in accordance with international law tensions and matters that threaten the security of that system. Looking to our collective future, we see great opportunities for increased prosperity. The 21st century is indisputably the Asia-Pacific century. We foresee 5 of the top 11 global economies being Asia-Pacific nations by 2025. We see the trade routes from India to the Pacific Oceans, from the Indian to the Pacific Oceans, and mainly through the Straits of Malacca and the South China Seas as being the world's busiest by 2025. And we are seeing a huge wave of urbanisation and the growth of a global middle class, most spectacularly in the growing number of megacities on the coastlines of much of the Asia Pacific. This is a time for dynamism through increased trade and investment. But that dynamism is at risk if we cannot collectively manage the substantial social, economic and strategic transformation currently underway in our region. Our collective interest in maintaining peace and security in our region is far greater now than ever before. That's why Australia welcomes the statements made by ASEAN foreign ministers at the ASEAN Summit on 10-11 May 2014, which expressed their serious concerns over the ongoing developments in the South China Sea. We share the serious concerns expressed by ASEAN over recent developments which have served to raise tensions and temperature in that region. Australia does not take a position on competing claims in the South China Sea, but we have a legitimate interest in the maintenance of peace and stability, respect for international law, unimpeded trade and freedom of navigation. The use of force or coercion to unilaterally alter the status quo in the East China Sea and the South China Sea is simply not acceptable. We urge all parties to exercise restrain from actions that could increase tensions, to clarify and pursue claims in accordance with international law, including the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Continuing confrontations such as those we are seeing in the South China Sea pose a clear threat to the collective good of all nations in the region. Any breakdown in security through miscalculation or actions that run contrary to the general principles of international law and the free flow of goods and services through our region would be catastrophic for all of our nations. It would have dire consequences for the economic prosperity of the whole region. For Australia's part, we do not see security as a zero-sum game. We see security as a collective good, one which all of the nations in the region share in and in which each of us has a role and a responsibility. All regional powers, including the United States, China, India, Japan, the Republic of Korea and the nations of ASEAN have contributed and benefited from the security and stability that our region has enjoyed. It bears repeating, however, that the continued presence of the United States has underpinned the region's stability for the past 70 years. That's why Australia welcomes the US rebalance to the Asia-Pacific region. We see it as an opportunity to foster further close cooperation in the region. I also pause to acknowledge the keynote speech made by Japan's Prime Minister Abe, and Australia welcomes Japan's efforts to re-examine its security and defence policies so that it can make a greater contribution to regional peace and to regional security. ASEAN's role in the region's growth is central. ASEAN is the region's longest-standing multilateral political and economic organisation. The establishment of the ASEAN Defence Ministers meeting in 2006 was indeed a watershed. The ADMM has shown its utility in promoting regional peace and stability through dialogue and practical cooperation in defence and security. It has also promoted mutual trust, confidence and openness through greater understanding of members' defence and security challenges. Australia shares that goal. We believe that transparency, dialogue and multilateral regional cooperation are key to promoting regional peace and security. They are tangible processes that can help to avoid and reduce tensions. Australia is committed to being transparent about its defence and security planning. That is why defence white papers are so important to us. The government of Tony Abbott has recently commenced a new Defence White Paper process. Due for release in 2015, this new White Paper will be the cornerstone of the Australian Government's defence policy. This new White Paper will transparently describe the Government's long-term defence strategy, its capability intentions, its resourcing, and the role we expect the Australian Defence Force to play in supporting and promoting regional peace and regional security. The White Paper will provide a fully costed, affordable plan for the development of the Australian Defence Force into the future. It will align our defence strategy and capability aspirations with the Government's broader fiscal and policy initiatives. It will take stock of the long-term opportunities and challenges for Australia's defence and security needs. We openly communicate our interests and intentions for the Australian Defence Force so that there can be no misunderstanding about our actions, what they mean for Australia and what they mean for the region. Such transparency helps to mitigate any uncertainty about our plans. Regular dialogue and practical defence cooperation will be a key element of our new Defence White Paper. Strong and resilient partnerships with our allies, friends and regional neighbours will be at the heart of our policy approach. If we understand one another, we can better comprehend the motivations behind each other's actions, making miscalculation ever the much less likely. This is a key contribution that defence leaders and their organisations can make to support the wider diplomatic resolution of disputes and the management of tensions. And I underline the word transparency. To be fully effective, mutual understanding must be reinforced by practical cooperation at all levels. We need to build habits of cooperation, personal linkages and connections, and the means to diffuse tension and crisis, whether that be at the strategic, the operational or the tactical level. Australia understands the importance of building deep and lasting links with regional partners. We have invested heavily and will continue to do so in supporting the development of the military capabilities of Southeast Asia, the Pacific nations, all through our Defence Cooperation Plan. This program includes education and training, officer exchanges and exercises. This has helped build strong people-to-people links and develop mutual understanding between Australia and the region. Australia is also a strong and active supporter of the region's evolving security architecture. We believe its continued development strengthens the region's capacity to effectively deal with and respond to unforeseen crises. As I mentioned earlier, ASEAN has been central to that success. A cohesive and strong ASEAN is critical to the security of Southeast Asia and the broader Asia-Pacific region. This year, Australia proudly celebrates 40 years as ASEAN's first dialogue partner. Building regional, multilateral defence collaboration takes time, but it is bearing fruit. This has been demonstrated in the 3 field training exercises conducted last year under ADMM Plus framework. Over the years, our region has demonstrated remarkable unity and a strong capacity for all of us to work together. Many countries in this room have made substantial contributions to the humanitarian and disaster relief efforts following tragedies such as the Boxing Day tsunami, Typhoon Haiyan, and of course more recently the Malaysian Airlines Flight 370. Those operations have also shown the benefit of greater interoperability between our nations. We have been able to achieve far more collectively than we could have achieved on our own and in isolation. But we must not be complacent. The reality is that we must step up our collective efforts to strengthen regional security cooperation. We are all aware that the MH370 incident took place after many years of discussion around strengthening collective responses to humanitarian assistance and disaster relief operations. Search and rescue is an intrinsic part of a common approach to HADR. We would all have to acknowledge that we can and must do better collectively. The price of failing to grasp the challenge of building closer security cooperation is that the region will be unable to effectively manage the crises that will present themselves from time to time in the future. We should look to build on this positive record of cooperation as we continue to evolve broader security architectures. This is not a trivial task. It is in fact one that is desperately important to this region. Following MH370, Australia worked hard to facilitate multilateral cooperation for the search carried out deep in the southern Indian Ocean. May I pause to say to China, thank you for the 2 Aleutians and the 6 surface vessels that came all the way down to some area 2,000 kilometres west of Western Australia. My hometown is Perth. To Japan, the P3s, the Gulfstream, Republic of Korea, the P3s, New Zealand, the P3s, Malaysia, the C-130s, the UK, 2 ships, Tireless and Echo, and to the USA, the 2/8s and a replenishment ship. This was a huge maritime exercise, a real, live, actually happening thing that was thrown upon us out of the blue. I thank those countries most sincerely for their openness, their contribution, and the friendship that we built up over that difficult time in seeking to come to Malaysia's assistance. I can tell you all that the search continues, and I hope that we will collectively be able to bring some resolution to the families on board that aircraft at some early point in the future. But let us not lose the benefits of cooperation action which have been learned from such a terrible experience as I've mentioned. Accordingly, today I wish to propose that Australia facilitates a regular multilateral search and rescue exercise in the future, so that we can all learn from the lessons that we have had to learn in the pursuit of the loss of that aircraft. This should be practically focused, designed to strengthen interoperability and to build fraternal connections. I'd be pleased to hear your reactions to such a suggestion. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Australia is committed to working with the region to build our collective future and our collective prosperity. Our increased interdependency means that we all have more to gain and more to lose in how we manage that future. The Asia-Pacific is fast becoming the centre of gravity in world affairs. We should not take for granted that this achievement is based on a shared commitment to 2 things. Firstly, the maintenance of peace and security based on respect for international law, and secondly, the freedom to trade and to navigate through and within our region. We need to collectively and jealously protect those fundamentals. Only then can we look forward to the dynamic and prosperous future that we can all envisage and that we are all working so hard towards. Thank you, and I look forward to your comments and your questions.
Senator and Minister, thank you very much again, and let me just underline the specific proposal you made near the end that Australia offers to facilitate regular multilateral search and rescue exercise in the future, and perhaps people might want to respond as to how that idea might be advanced. Let me now welcome to the podium General Minister of National Defence of Vietnam.
Dr. John Chipman, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the high-level defense delegation of Vietnam, I would like to sincerely thank the government, the Minister of Defense of Singapore, and the organizers of this 13th Shangri-La Dialogue for giving me the opportunity to attend and address this plenary session. Ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, we wish to express our high appreciation of Japan's positive pacifism articulated by Prime Minister Shinzo Abe last night. At this forum in 2013, Prime Minister Nguyễn Tấn Dũng of Vietnam conveyed a message to the international community on strategic trust, which underlined that trust is the beginning of all friendships and cooperation. The remedy that works to prevent calculations that would risk conflicts. Trust must be treasured and nurtured constantly by concrete, consistent actions in accordance with common norms and with a sincere attitude. Looking back after 1 year, we note that region and the world still see tensions and latent dangers of conflicts or wars, as we witness with every passing day, every passing hour through the media. Therefore, trust building is ever more imperative in face of the current regional and world situation. Management of strategic tension is an essential issue relating to peace, stability, and development of countries, of the region, and the entire world. It is the common desire of the international community and the interest of all countries. That is also the topic that I was requested to speak about it, and today I wish to share with you this topic. Ladies and gentlemen, overall, the regional and world landscape today sees the major trend of peace, cooperation, and development. But complex, latent, unforeseeable developments still remain. Tensions, religious and ethnic conflicts, secessionism, local wars, territorial disputes, political riots, intervention, attempts for regime change, terrorism are going on in an acute manner. Elements that threaten non-traditional security are on the rise, such as high-tech crimes in the areas of finance, monetary, electronic, telecommunication, biotechnology, and environment. The Asia-Pacific region enjoys dynamic development, high growth, and is a destination of choice for global investors. However, there exist tensions in the Korean Peninsula, sovereign disputes in the East China Sea and East Sea, which are the factors that may put peace and stability in the region at stake. The causes of these problems lie in the contradiction and conflict of interest that lead to the suspicion on goodwill and trust in relations and cooperation, the friction of interest in strategic competition and actions of mutual containment. In addition, there are also contradictions and differences in culture, religion, ethnicity, and ideology, and parties concerned have yet to find effective solutions. The common desire of countries in the world, including Vietnam, is the sustained maintenance of a peaceful and stable environment and joint efforts for development and prevention of conflicts and wars. I believe that to manage dangers of conflict, we must first and foremost have a common understanding. In upholding international responsibility, especially the role and responsibility of major powers, countries must have the responsibility to preserve the environment of peace, stability, and cooperation for common development, must observe the international law, the UN Charter, respect countries' independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity, not use our threat of force to settle disputes. It is necessary to enhance various aspects of cooperation on the basis of equality, mutual respect, and benefits, big or small countries alike. With that common understanding in place, we will have the solid foundation to build trust. Trust is not just reflected in words, rather it must be displayed by concrete, meaningful actions to promote transparency, equal dialogue, openness, development of friendship and cooperation among countries, respect for the rule of law and norms in international relations. Major countries have the responsibility and role for, as well as important contributions to make the development and enhancement of strategic trust. In reality, in each nation, even each family, there are contradictions and differences, let alone neighboring countries with border territorial disputes that may lead to frictions. What matters is high-level leaders of countries must remain extremely calm, exercise restraint, place national interest in the context of the interest of the region and the world, and make the choice of peaceful solutions via diplomatic negotiations in order to maintain friendly relations among countries. In settling any contradiction or dispute, parties concerned must exercise self-restraint, remain calm, understand the true nature of the problem in an objective manner in order to make decisions on the basis of objectivity and cautiousness. A minor mistake may turn tension into conflict. In handling tension in relations among countries, the army must restrain, control tightly, manage all activities of each and every commander, soldier, those in charge of directing weapons, equipment, combat vehicles, ships and airplanes. In management of strategic tension, communication has an extremely important role to play. The broadcasting of news must be honest, objective, timely, constructive, in the interests of the nation. Communication should create an environment conducive to the peaceful settlement of contradictions and conflicts. We must avoid using instigating language, let alone inciting national hatreds and making the situation become tenser, or creating pressure for leaders in considering and making decisions in handling the situation. To control and minimize the danger of conflict, we must make good use of cooperation mechanisms, both bilateral and multilateral. Issues related to two countries need to be settled bilaterally. Those involving multi-countries or multi-parties must be settled multilaterally. In the process of settling contradictions and differences, these contradictions and differences must be made public, transparent to the international community, thus avoiding misunderstanding or casting doubt to the public opinion. At present, we have in place such regional mechanisms such as ARF, Council for Security Cooperation in the Asia-Pacific, CSAP, DAS, ADMM, ADMM+, the ARF, the Maritime Forum, as well as this Shangri-La dialogue, which provide important frameworks for trust building, promotion of preventive diplomacy, and finding measures for conflict management. Ladies and gentlemen, relations between Vietnam and the friendly neighboring country of China have seen overall strong growth. Outstanding issues include disputes over the sovereignty in this sea and frictions from time to time. such as the incident on the 1st of May 2014. China unilaterally placed its deep water drilling rig Haiyan 981 in the continental shelf of Vietnam, an exclusive economic zone of Vietnam, causing anger for the Vietnamese people and concerns for the countries in the region and the international community. It is our clear awareness that struggling to protect territorial sovereignty is sacred. Vietnam consistently pursues the policy of persevering with the settlement of disputes via peaceful means on the basis of international law, particularly the 1982 UNCLOS, the Declaration on Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea DOC ASEAN 6-point principle statement, and moving towards the establishment of the Code of Conduct COC between ASEAN and China. The agreement between high-level leaders of Vietnam and China. Our policy is to preserve peace, stability, maritime security, safety, and freedom of overflight in the sea, maintain political stability, and improve living standards of the people, and preserve the traditional friendship between the people of Vietnam and China via dialogues at various levels between various agencies with China in order to reduce tension. With that policy, Vietnam has exercised utmost restraint. We do not use airplanes or gunboats or missile boats. We only use maritime civilian boats, or coast guard boats, or fishing vessels. We do not collide, or we do not use cannon guns against China's ships. We demand that China withdraw the oil rig out of the continental shelf and economic exclusive zone of Vietnam and negotiated with Vietnam to maintain peace, stability, and friendship between the two countries, which is beneficial to the two countries, to peace, stability of the region and the world. We believe that the army of the two countries must exercise utmost restraint, strengthen cooperation, tightly control all activities, avoid activity that may get out of control. The two countries' armies must play the advisory role to the parties and states leaders to satisfactorily settle the issue in a calm and patient fashion in order to avoid conflicts or wars. Vietnam has been proactive and positive in engaging in defense and cooperation with ASEAN countries, as well as participating in joint exercises on search and rescue, humanitarian assistance, and natural disaster relief, establishing hotlines among ASEAN countries. On the 8th of June 2014, Vietnam and the Philippines will organize exchanges among forces stationed in the islands of Song Tử Đông and Song Tử Tây, Northeast Cay, or Southeast Cay, of Trường Sa, or Spratly Islands, in order to strengthen friendship and build trust, as well as reducing tension in the region. We hope that common efforts of the international community will help step-by-step settle contradictions, differences, and maintain stability and development in the region, as well as contributing to the peaceful global environment. In conclusion, I wish to again convey to you the message of the Vietnamese government and people. That is, with the tradition of peace and friendship and peace-loving, Vietnam stands ready to be a friend, reliable partner of all countries in the international community, on the basis of respect for independence, sovereignty, for mutual benefits, and work together to build a world of peace, prosperity, cooperation, and development in the Asia-Pacific region and the world. I wish you all good health, and I thank Mr. President and you all.
Thank you, General Thanh, for your very clear statement of Vietnam's policy in the current environment, and for your call, repeating that of the Prime Minister last year, for building through whatever means possible strategic trust in the region. I'll now open up the floor to points of comment and debate. Let me remind you that there are 2 steps that need to be taken to get the floor. One is to put your name card in the slot. The second is to press the microphone button so that your microphone turns green. It will not be on until I turn it red, but unless you press the button, you're not on my list. The first of about a dozen who are at present on the list is Tadashi Maeda from Japan.
Thank you, John. On the maritime securities of South China Sea, it started as a bilateral issues on territorial disputes, for example, between Vietnam and China. But it should not be only a bilateral issue; it should be solved among the multilateral nations. But as a defense minister of Malaysia this morning said that it is pretty tough to make the legally binding code of conduct between China and ASEAN, but there's no other alternatives. I think it is true. But China is a growing power of the centralized control. On the other hand, the ASEAN is composed of 10 countries, and there's a different domestic agenda in each member country of ASEAN. So it is quite difficult to keep the solidarity and integrity of ASEAN. So in this regard, my question is both to the Defense Minister of Indonesia and Defense Minister of Vietnam, how the outside power like Japan or Australia or the United States can play the role more proactively to foster and cement the solidarity of ASEAN in this regard. Thank you.
Next is Professor Robert Asen of New Zealand.
Thanks very much. My question is mainly for Australian Defence Minister Johnston. It was interesting in your comments how similar your comments about the importance of respect for international law, freedom of navigation, the avoidance of coercion and intimidation were to the comments that were made by Prime Minister Abe last night and by Secretary Hagel this morning. There's a very common theme there. And obviously there's a real interest in avoiding the types of coercive behaviour that Defence Minister Thanh was talking about this morning. But I'm just wondering whether you feel that in the protection of those norms and the assertion of those norms of freedom of navigation and overflight, of respect for those laws, where in fact it's possible for there to be, in a sense, a perception of a lack of restraint, that the defence of those norms becomes, in a sense, a bit too assertive in kind. And how do you actually deal with that to make sure that the defence of those norms is actually reassuring to countries like China?
And from Australia, Professor Carlisle Thayer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is to the Vietnamese Minister of National Defence, Phung. In your presentation, you stressed the importance of high-level leaders. I was in Vietnam when this oil rig crisis began, and Vietnam wanted to activate a hotline. It proposed a special envoy to China. It offered to send its party secretary general. You met your counterpart in Naypyidaw. The Vietnamese foreign minister has contacted by phone his counterpart. Can you give us an assessment of where we're at between China and Vietnam actually getting together to meet bilaterally to mitigate these current tensions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And the next is William Chung, the ISS.
Thank you, John. I'd like to follow up with a question on Vietnam. Now, this oil rig crisis, we can say that the Chinese do have a claim to these waters, given that some commentators have said that the oil rig is located 17 nautical miles from Woody Island. Now, given that Minister Phung had said repeatedly about the rule of law and refrained from the use of force, will Vietnam go the Philippine route by taking this entire episode, this dispute, to third-party arbitration? Thank you.
From the United States, Jed Snyder.
The minister from Indonesia has very helpfully reminded us of a decision taken some years ago for ASEAN to look towards a more genuine approach towards the security policy community by next year. The Australian Defence Minister reminds us of how long it takes for real multilateral defence cooperation to materialize, and the Minister from Vietnam has made the point that strategic competition is growing, and there are existing organizations attached to ASEAN which could be used to address this. My question for whomever on the panel would like to address it is this: what can we expect by 2015, realistically, as evidence that ASEAN's approach to security planning and policy has actually changed, or is that a bridge too far?
And from the Philippines, Professor Romel Banloy.
Good afternoon. I have a question for General Thanh. During the visit of your Prime Minister to the Philippines, he mentioned about pursuing the legal option. And how serious is Vietnam in pursuing the legal option? And what's the level of your preparation to pursue the legal option? And under what condition will Vietnam pursue the legal option? Thank you.
And also from the ISS, Mark Fitzpatrick.
Thank you. In this panel, as in previous presentations, there's been an emphasis on cautioning against unilateral measures. The speakers were all diplomatic in the way they couched this. The question for the Minister of Indonesia is whether he would also like to comment at all about Indonesia's territorial issues and the recently reported deployment of attack helicopters to islands that are in dispute.
And the final question in this round, but I'll have another one, is Andy Rakmianto from Indonesia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question to the Defense Minister of Australia. Secretary Hagel this morning, among others, mentioned about the deployment of U.S. Marines in Darwin, Australia, as only rotational presence. In terms of numbers, it may be small, but in fact, in terms of the reason behind it, it may be a strategic one. So, what is actually the reason behind this deployment? Is it to describe, for example, there is a connection between the deployment and the U.S. rebalancing approach to the Asia Pacific, knowing the fact that this decision has been announced jointly by former Prime Minister Gillard and President Obama when the U.S. rebalancing approach was announced. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. I think I'll go back to the panel now, 2-3 minutes each to answer the questions put to them, and I'll go in reverse order. So General Thanh first.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me first thank you for your interest in the situation in Vietnam and for posing questions so that we can have opportunity to provide information to you. First, countries outside of ASEAN, what the role that they can play in ASEAN. You know that ASEAN has been making efforts to build community, including political security community, by 2015. ASEAN very much in need of solidarity, unity, maintaining its centrality in cooperation with friends and with dialogue partners. ASEAN also needs to have positive cooperation and role played by major powers in the Asia-Pacific region so that ASEAN can be a grouping with cooperation, with unity to settle issues such as maritime security and safety or sovereign disputes in the sea. So we need your role in cooperation in the spirit of peace on the basis of international law, the 1982 UNCLOS, and the existing mechanisms that we have established. Second issue on the role of high-level leaders in settling disputes over territory claims between Vietnam and China. Vietnam and China has enjoyed long-standing traditional friendship. We assisted each other during hard times and good. Overall, we had good relations. And at present, relations are good. And bilateral relations are good for both countries and for other countries, and leaders of the two countries as they meet. High-level leaders of both China and Vietnam all agreed that as neighboring countries, we may have frictions and differences, and when that happens, the two sides should sit together and discuss for settlement via peaceful means to maintain relations for mutual development, for maintaining peace and stability of the two countries and the region. At present, various levels and agencies have contacted each other. I myself made a phone call with the deputy chair of the Military Commission of China, and I also contacted our counterparts in the Defense Force of China through the channels of party and state. At present, Vietnam has been actively, proactively requesting that high-level leaders of China, maybe in the form of phone calls or special envoys or letters exchanged or meet directly to discuss the matters so that the two sides can restrain and resolve the issues via peaceful measures to reduce tensions, because it is detrimental to both countries and it is not in line with the desire and the interest of both countries. And leaders of China are considering these proposals by Vietnam. And I hope that in the coming days, leaders of the two countries can meet and discuss these disputes. The final issue about the legal measures that Vietnam may resort to for settling this issue. Vietnam and China have friendly relations. We are neighboring countries with land and rivers linked together. We have interdependency in economy. We have mutual interests, so we still have room for peaceful dialogues. We are considering possible options with regard to the use of international legal institutions. And if we have to use that, it means it is only the last resort. But we still hope and we still want that leaders of China and Vietnam will enter into talks. In the past, for example, between Vietnam and China, there's the issue of land border, which was difficult, and there's negotiations going on for decades. And now we have demarcation, we have plantation of border plants, and relations across the border between the two countries have been going well, and the people crossing the border, engaging in various activities between the people and the border guards forces of the countries. So it was a border of friendship. In the Tonkin Gulf, there's negotiation and delimitation, and it was stable. And the issue in this sea, I think we should follow the approach easy first, difficult later, and we persevere with negotiations so that we can maintain peace, stability, traditional friendship, and mutually beneficial relations. The legal case that may be used, of course, is peaceful, is civilized, is in line with the international law, the 1982 UNCLOS, the United Nations Charter. But I repeat that that's undesirable option. And if we have to, then it is a must. We don't have any other choice. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Johnston.
Thanks, John. I had 3 questions I think were relevant to Australia. First one is, why is there a common theme between what I said, what Secretary Hagel said, and what Prime Minister Abe said? And the answer is very simply because those principles are, we see, irrefutably, soundly based in international law. The rule of law is the first principle that we must go to and adopt. Now, this space is a very difficult one. When we are talking about territorial air and sea locations, there is a huge risk of misunderstanding, misinterpretation of ad hoc determinations, particularly with respect to EEZs and territorial waters per se. We think that these matters must find their solution in detailed arbitration, detailed evaluation by independent judicial review, such that we all know must occur within our countries by and large. These values are very important, particularly to Australia, and we see them as being the foundation stones for the determination of disputes. The alternative, I think, is unsatisfactory. Secondly, someone asked us, what does change look like? The models for negotiation between parties, can I compliment Minister Purnomo, his resolution of matters with the Philippines. Indonesia and Philippines agreements have been very, very strong models for sensible resolution. I know that Taiwan and Japan have also gone down that path. Can I also point to cross-strait relations between Taiwan and the mainland? These things have evolved in a way that has been, I think, a very strong model for international legal resolution, for cooperation, for trust, and I think they stand out as the road that we should follow with respect to these tensions that we have all been discussing. And lastly, US Marines in Darwin. We have 1,100 Marines in Darwin, but they are by no means the largest contingent of a foreign country in Australia. There are many other countries that have training facilities in Australia that we enjoy close and friendly relationships with. Many of China's pilots have received their training in Australia. There is no sovereignty or basing of US Marines in Australia. Australia owns all of the facilities. We share them with the Marines on 6-monthly rotations as they come through Darwin. Most of you would be aware that space is something Australia has quite a bit of, and that we accordingly, when compared to Guam, Okinawa, etc., have some comparative and competitive advantage. The Marines come down, we interoperate, as we did for Hainan, as we did for the tsunami, as we do for so many things. And if people understand that it is simply part of the way we do our business with a number of countries, not just the United States, in Australia.
Purnomo.
Let me wrap up the questions to me by 3 different items. The first one is then we are talking about the bilateral issues between the claimant states in the South China Seas. 4 of the ASEAN members involved as a claimant states, namely the Philippines, Brunei Darussalam, Vietnam, and Malaysia. The second issue that I would like to share with you is the multilateral issues. That is the South China Sea issue that should be a peace, stable region, and freedom of navigation. The third thing I'd like to share with you is regarding the Chinese armed forces modernization. When we talk about the bilateral issue, I think we talk the claimant state. I think that's the room negotiating between two nations. I think should be there to solve the issue on the dispute area. I share with you the way that we solved the dispute before in the maritime border between us and Philippines and between us and Vietnam. It took us more than a decade to solve the maritime border between us and Vietnam, and finally we did it in year 2003, 2004. And lately, a couple of weeks ago, we signed also solve the dispute between Indonesia and Philippines for the maritime border between us. So when people sit down, talk and discuss, and find a way to solve the issue, I think we believe, especially if we use the ASEAN spirit, the ASEAN's, we have the ASEAN community's spirit to sit down and talk with a strong willingness to see the solution of the problem. I think we can do that. That's the bilateral issue. And the multilateral issue, like I said before, that Indonesia is not the claimant state, but we are part of the ASEAN. We would like to see the region is in the peace and stable and freedom of negotiation. And we do have the principles to use as a vehicle for the foundation for this kind of achievement in peace, stability, and the freedom of navigation is TAC, like I mentioned to you, Treaty of Amity and Cooperation. It was signed 2003 by many countries. ASEAN is also signed. China is also signed. I think about 40 countries now has ratified it. I think if we effectivize this treaty, I think that'd be good as a foundation to start with for this kind of multilateral discussion, or even using that bilateral discussion among the parties. DOC, Declaration of Conduct, although it's not that strong binding, but I think that Declaration of Conduct that was started in 2002, but it's also signed a couple of years ago. That's also can be used as a vehicle for this kind of solving the solution. I know that we are now progressing with the COC. We started, although the progress is not that quick, but if we keep going that, I believe that someday that we're going to achieve the agreement on that code of conduct and Bali process. So those are the things that we are moving forward in ASEAN. The involvement of the countries like Australia, US, actually they are the members of the ASEAN Plus. We mix together, we work together in the 5 different cooperation. We work in the counter-terrorism, ASEAN Plus 8, the 8 countries, the US, Soviet, Russia, South Korea, Japan, China, Australia, India, and New Zealand. We mix together, we keep contact together, and the counter-terrorism, peacekeeping operation, military medicines, humanitarian assistance, and also in humanitarian assistance, disaster relief. So in the 5 area of cooperation, we work together. We keep contact each others, and that involves also China, involves also US, Australia, and that also can be used as a vehicle, to share the idea, to discuss, the problems, including the problem in the South China Sea. When talking about the ASEAN next year's ASEAN community, I want to share with you that ASEAN community will have 3 different pillars. The first one is including the political and security community. The second one is on the economic community. The third one is on the welfare. We in the defense is categorized in the political security. It's a lot of achievement that we had in the ASEAN Defense Minister meeting. Among others is the ASEAN Defense Industry Cooperation, transparencies, and also the use of the peacekeeping center networks for the ASEAN countries. So those things that I think we have achieved, and we hope that by next years that will be contribute to the ASEAN community. I think those are that I can share my answer to you.
Thank you very much. We have 14 minutes and 34 seconds left, so I'm going to take questions for about 9 minutes, and then I would give 90 seconds to each of the three panelists to conclude on time at 1:30. So I invite Christmas, and I'll start first with Dr. Wang Yiwei of China.
Thank you. I have a question to Indonesia Minister. In your speech, you mentioned to avoid the confrontation between China and the United States. In Asia, there are two kinds of security architecture. One is led by U.S. airline system. Another one is ASEAN-led security architecture. So, in the future, how to combine these two kinds of security architecture? Because the former one is exclusive to China. The latter is inclusive to China. As the previous session of the Malaysia's defense minister also mentioned, we need to combine security architecture to include all the stakeholders in this region. So how you and ASEAN's initiative in this regard, how to evaluate that President Xi Jinping in the Shanghai summit of the KICA, the Asian approach to see the Asian security. Thank you.
Thank you. And from Japan and the Asahi Shimbun, Yoichi Kato.
Thank you, Dr. Chipman. Let me ask a little bit about the rotational presence of the United States. It seems that rotational presence of the U.S. forces in this region is the main tool of the U.S. rebalance to Southeast Asia and South Indo-Pacific regions where the United States does not have any permanent bases and facilities. And as has been pointed out in a previous round of questions, that Australia has been hosting marine rotational forces in Darwin, and Singapore is hosting littoral combat ships. And my question goes to all three ministers. First, to Minister Johnston of Australia. Can you share your assessment as to the impact of the U.S. such a rotational presence on the strategic balance in the region, especially in relation with China? Is it all positive, or it might have some negative impact that has to be rectified to some extent? And second, the ministers of both Indonesia and Vietnam, are there any possible circumstances where your country might consider accepting the rotational presence of U.S. forces? Thank you.
Thank you. And from the Financial Times, Dimitri Sevastopoulou.
Thank you, John. I'd like to ask the Vietnamese minister. He said that going the international arbitration route was the worst-case scenario for Vietnam, or the last option. Does China need to remove its oil rig from the Paracels area in order to avoid Vietnam taking that route? Or are you not going to make a decision before the middle of August when CNOOC says it will stop drilling anyway?
And from the European Union, Reinhard Bütikofer.
Thank you, Chair. My question goes to the Indonesian Minister of Defense. Sir, beyond the present tensions which are at the focus of this conversation, you also mentioned non-traditional security issues. To name one, climate change with its impact on the security of water supply, for instance. How would that figure in your analysis of strategic security challenges over the next 10 to 15 years? And what would be the adequate approach and format in dealing with it? Could building of trust be promoted by addressing such issues multilaterally?
And from India, Prabhat Shukla.
Thank you, Chair. I had a couple of points that I just want to rush through.
No, I think you have one that you can rush through, please.
We are pressed for time, okay. I wanted to say that so far the focus has been exclusively on maritime issues, and that is, I suppose, in the fitness of things. But for many of us, India, for instance, and I'm sure this would apply to a few others as well, land issues are also important. And I'm just wondering, when we talk about an architecture for the Asia Pacific, would it be possible to work some of the land issues also? For instance, Afghanistan would certainly affect a lot of the countries in the region, and I could name a couple of other issues as well. I'll end with a brief question, if I might, and that concerns the role of the East Asia Summit. Prime Minister Abe mentioned yesterday that the EAS should be the primary focus for all security-related issues. From the previous session and from this one, I get a sense that not all ASEAN countries subscribe to that view. I'm wondering if you could request the two ASEAN defense ministers to weigh in on this. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last question is, I'm afraid there are many others, but the last question on this session, Professor Nick Bisley from Australia.
Thanks, John. Minister Johnston, you mentioned the possibility of a multilateral exercise for disaster relief and rapid reaction. I was wondering if you and the other panellists might reflect on what would be the best modality for this to occur. Would it be ASEAN-centred, East Asia Summit, ADMM+, or something distinct again?
Thank you very much. Well, I'd invite the panelists each in turn. This round was briefer than the last one, to come up with a concluding statement relevant to the questions that have been asked. Perhaps General Tan first.
Thank you very much. There are two questions for me that I wish to respond, whether Vietnam would accept a rotational tours of the United States. We in Vietnam have the foreign policy of self-reliance and independence. There's no foreign military base in Vietnam, no military alliance. We only engage in cooperation in bilateral and multilateral frameworks, for example, ADMM+. Our consistent policy is also not to go with one country against another country. So there's no foreign organizations or individuals that use the territory of Vietnam to act against another country. Vietnam, we have the advantage, that is, we have the Cam Ranh Bay. It is deep water port, wind close, near the international sea route, and we see that it will be a waste if it is not tapped into. So we are considering a plan that we will invest in it, will run that facility. We build a port to provide service for ships of all countries. And our exit, of course, with permission of Vietnam, with economic contract, with term, and that's the service that we provide. And that facility is run by us, so that we can maximize the economic benefits of that port. And we are considering that. We are working on that. But we have not yet set up the feasibility study. We have not allocated funds, but there's a facility. There's a policy. And I again repeat that it is run by Vietnam. And if the project is completed and ships of countries, including those from China or the US or Japan or Australia, EU or any other countries, ASEAN, you can travel, you can visit, and you can receive service from us. Second, about the international arbitration mechanism and whether China will have to withdraw, I think that is up to the consideration of China. For Vietnam, we must try to find a way that is conducive to protection of sovereignty and also help relations with China to maintain peace and stability in accordance with international law. Whether withdraw it or not is up to China's decision. But we demand that China soon withdraw its oil rig out of the continental shelf and economic zone of Vietnam. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Two questions to me, I think, unless someone wants to say that I should be answering something else. The exercise that I proposed was a search and rescue potentially maritime operation. Now, what we don't want to do is prescribe to anybody what forum that should go to. I would have thought ADMM Plus was not a bad choice, but we're open to engagement and evaluation between officials as to what our neighbourhood sees as the most optimum form of exercise. It may even be that we get together and do a desktop type operation initially. The objective is really operational understanding and interoperability at short notice for a successful response to an unforeseen crisis. Now, if we keep it in that sort of parameter, learning the lessons of MH370, I think we can go forward looking to do things in a much more successful and cost-effective and efficient way. So it's a suggestion that we put on the table respectfully. It's not something we want to prescribe. We think it's worth doing. Given, the archipelago has some geophysical attributes that mean there are tsunamis, there are earthquakes, there are all sorts of things that can happen without much notice. If I can turn to the Marines. Now, the strategic rebalance impact of having 1,000 Marines in Darwin, I think, is virtually zero. The reason is that they deploy to a number of training facilities, some of which are more than 700 kilometres from the coast. The logistics for the deployment are planned over a very, very long time, and they're planned in terms of fuel, provisions and ammunition for a specific task. To turn around the focus of that deployment, which is a considerable logistical exercise, into something else, I think you might all agree, and those of you that understand the logistics behind moving a force of that size anywhere, is considerable. So there they are, halfway down the Northern Territory into central parts of Australia, doing their exercises, doing their training, interoperating with Australia, and that's what's happening. So that with respect to that question, I think that's a good question. I'm very happy to say I think the regional strategic impact of those forces in Darwin is zero. Thank you.
Purnomo. Well, I do not believe there will be 2-3 regional architectures, security architectures. What I do believe that the United States will remain a military superpowers. I do believe that China across the board will also be the growing the power and will be the key players shaping the new global order, especially in the regions. I will also believe that ASEAN, when they achieve the next year as a community, will also be the solid political and security pillar to the ASEAN community next year. Japan, India, South Korea, Australia, the way that I said before, will also be exercise their rightful role in accordance with the evolving situations. That's what the architecture that I see is going to be in the near futures. Regarding the Indonesia's position for the U.S. Marines in Darwin or the littoral combat ships in Singapore, we have no problems. We don't see that as a threat to us, to Indonesia. In the case of non-traditional issue, especially that mentioned about the water supply, the way we see the non-traditional issue now is priority to the cyber and also the terrorism. I think two that non-traditional issue are really confronting us in the region, especially in our country. When we talk about the water supply, I remember, the Club of Rome back in 1970s, when they set up the doomsday scenario, because the scarcity of the water, scarcity of the food, because of the exponential growth of the population. But the doomsday scenario is not happened today. The question is why? The question is then, have the answer is because of technology. So what I do believe, the technology will give the answer to what the non-traditional issue, especially that is including the asymmetrics, I said before, the terrorisms and cyber. But really, water supply, things like that, is something that concerns us. But when we move up to the technology, I think they'll be giving the answers.
Thank you very much. Well, we've had a very rich morning, and it's continued right to 1:29 p.m. If I am to draw one optimistic note from the last hour and a half, is that one of the persons on this podium said that going to international arbitration following a dispute was a last resort, even if undesirable. If generally going to international arbitration is the last resort and were to take place before, not after, the use of excessive force, then perhaps the opportunities for diplomatic solutions to problems here without the use of force are not quite as bad as some people have feared. Let me thank the three ministers on your behalf for their presentations in response to questions, and invite you all to proceed to a well-deserved lunch. Thank you very much.